Hey church, welcome and thank you for worshiping with us. Wherever you're worshiping, in your home or on your TV, laptop or phone, you are a part of this family. And you could watch or listen to past messages by heading to mycornerstone.family. On our sermons page, you can view playlists, search for past messages, and more. You can even listen to our content by subscribing to the Cornerstone America's podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I hope you enjoy the message and thank you for being a part of the Cornerstone family.
So last week we talked about family problems many times are passed down from one generation to the next. Our sins, our faults, our shortcomings, our children picking them up and sometimes repeating the very same thing we do. But this morning I want to remind you that our families and our family problems don't happen, our families don't exist in some sort of cocoon or on some sort of deserted island. But we're all influenced by the culture around us. And sometimes our problem is the culture around us, causing us to live by a different set of values than which God would want us to live. Our families are impacted by our culture. We may have great values, but our kids and even ourselves are being exposed to so many things out there in the world. There's a peer culture out there and peer pressure, and we live in this day and age where we have this media, entertainment, marketing juggernaut. You guys like that word, juggernaut? I thought that was good. That just sweeps over our families like a tsunami. And we're just engulfed in this. How do we keep our bearings? How do we stay focused on God? How do we keep going the right direction in this culture in which we live? And so this morning I want to talk to you about how to live pure in an impure world. How do we keep our values when, in a sense, we live in Sodom? Sodom is known in the Bible for being a very wicked and immoral place. How do we remain pure and live a godly life in the middle of this culture? Well, Genesis 18 and 19 talks about Sodom and Gomorrah and what happened there. Many of you may be familiar with the story. Genesis chapter 13 is when the story is introduced to us, when Lot chooses to go to Sodom. So let's start at chapter 19, verse 1. Let's read through here and see what we can learn about values in our families and how sometimes we end up in Sodom. Genesis 19, starting in verse 1, a very interesting story. I think you guys are going to love this morning. There's nothing boring about the Bible. When you get and read these stories, man, there's some crazy stuff that happens. This is one of those stories. So just, buckle up and let's go for this ride, see what happens. Verse 1 says, "Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face toward the ground." So they have two angels coming into the city. Lot's at the gate of the city. He meets them. And verse 2, "And he said, 'Hear now, my lords, please turn to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet, and then you may rise early and go on your way.' And they said, 'No, but we will spend the night in the open square.' But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house." So you have all these men from the city coming and surrounding the house. And this is what happens. "And they called to Lot and said, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally.'" That they wouldn't have sexual relations with these two men that came. Verse 6, "So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, 'Please, brethren, do not do so wickedly.'" And verse 8 says, "So now I have two daughters." This is Lot here speaking. "I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let them bring them out to you. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." Now, this is probably one of the most difficult verses in this story. That how could Lot be willing to give up his two daughters and send them out to these men for them to do whatever they want and then continue to protect the two men that came into the city that he is housing? And there's been two traditional ways that we've understood this verse, or theologians have understood this verse. The first one is that Lot was influenced by Sodom. And it goes like this, that Lot had lived in Sodom and there was so much wickedness that he was just really kind of tainted by it. And he was willing to do something so evil to give up his daughters as he was trying to protect these two men. And scholars would read like 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 through 9, where it says this: if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, notice he calls him a righteous man, but then it says, who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawlessness. For that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. So here you have what they would say is that by being in the city and living so closely to the sin, he was impacted, and this was part of the reason why he was willing to give up his daughters. That's one view. The second view is Lot was using shock language. Peter talks about Lot being a righteous man, and although distressed, some theologians would say that, yeah, he was distressed, but he was a righteous man. And what kind of righteous man would give his daughters to these group of men just to do anything they wanted? And so they would see this more as a rhetorical statement. Like, you can have these two men over my dead body. Do we mean literally over my dead body? No. Or we might say, like, man, things are getting so expensive that it's costing me an arm and a leg. Is it really costing us an arm and a leg? It's not. But it just shows that it's expensive. And so the idea here, if we go back to Genesis 19:8, notice these words. It talks about going under, that these men have come under the shadow of my roof. And one of the things we need to understand about this ancient Near Middle Eastern culture, that hospitality was everything. It was hugely important. And this idea that these men had come under the shadow of his roof, they were under his protection. And so some theologians would see this, that Lot is basically saying, hey, I'm not going to hand these men over to you, just like I'm not going to hand over my daughters to you. They're under the protection of my roof. They've come under the shadow of my covering. And what's interesting about this language is that even this language is used of God. And one of the most well-known chapters, Psalm 91, verse 1, says this: whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Now I love this verse. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High, dwells in, another translation says, in the secret place of the Most High, will rest in the shadow. You come under his shadow, will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Not just God, but of the Almighty. You come under his protection. Meaning, if you live near God, you live under his protection. That's what this verse means. And so, in a sense, Lot is saying, hey, they've come under my roof. They've come under my protection. Either way you see this verse, the danger of compromise exists. And Sodom's corruption was real and it was pressing. But we also know the protection of God is real. And as we had these 9 people baptized, they were all experiencing this, living under or coming under the shadow of the Almighty, under his covering, which is a safe place. Let's keep going in our story. Genesis 19, verse 9. And they said, stand back. This was their response. The men outside, this is their response to Lot offering him his daughters. And they said, stand back. This one came, talking about Lot now, this one came here and he keeps acting as a judge. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be told they're doing something wrong. They don't want to be told no. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out, these 2 angels, reached out their hands, pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. If these men would not have struck them with blindness, they would have broken in and just looted the whole house and the people in it. Genesis 19, verse 12. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, a son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But his sons-in-laws thought he was joking. So they didn't listen, they didn't leave, they don't go with them. And when morning dawned, verse 15, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife, your 2 daughters, who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And then in verse 23, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar, and then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. And he overthrew those cities. And notice here, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground, gone. And verse 26, another well-known verse out of this story, but Lot's wife, notice his wife, looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So she turns around, looks back, and becomes a pillar of salt. Now, again, there's 2 ways to understand this verse traditionally. Theologians have looked at it a little bit differently. The first one is she simply looked back, and because she looked back when she was told to leave, and some would say this word look back is to not just to look real quickly or to glance, it's to gaze longingly as if she didn't want to leave, and so she was turned into a pillar of salt. The other way to understand it was that she actually went back into the city or stayed down in that plains area and didn't leave the area. And scholars who believe this second idea use 2 different verses to come to that conclusion. Luke 17, verse 31 and 32, Jesus speaking here says this, "In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away." And then he says, likewise, the one who's in the field, let him not return, meaning let him not go back home, not let him return or go back. And then he says, remember Lot's wife, connecting the going back to Lot's wife. So it's very possible she didn't just look back, she ended up going back. The other thing in Genesis 19, verse 17, it says this. I skipped over this when we went through the story. It says, "So it came to pass when they had brought them outside, the 2 angels brought them outside the city of Sodom and said this, 'Escape for your life,'" meaning run for your life. And then they say, "Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain." They had to get out of the entire area. In fact, he says, "Escape to the mountains lest you be destroyed." So it's possible as they're leaving, she wasn't wanting to go, and I think Lot really wasn't that interested in going either. These angels had kind of drugged them out of the city and then said, "Run for your life, get out of there." Lot takes off, his 2 daughters take off. At some point, it's possible that his wife not only looked around, turned back, but went back maybe into the city or just stayed in the plains and was destroyed with the rest of the people that were down there. Nonetheless, the point is important that obedience must be complete. Our hearts must move forward along with our feet. Lot's wife lost her life because she didn't leave her old life. But the question becomes when we read this story is how did a person like Lot end up in Sodom anyways? How did he end up there? And so that's what we're going to dig into this morning. We got to remember Lot hung around with Abraham, who was generally a good guy who was following God, was following God's plan for his life. And they both left Haran, an ancient city, because God had called Abraham to the promised land. Lot went with him, and he had been traveling and living with Lot. And how does Abraham end up in the promised land, and then Lot ends up in Sodom? So let's jump into that, and we're going to go back to Genesis 13 to catch the very beginning of the story and see how he ended up there. And we see in verse 5, Lot also, who went with Abram, who's the same person as Abraham, his name has not been changed yet, had flocks and herds and tents. Now, what he's talking about here, if you get the context, you go back and read from verse 1, they've just come out of Egypt, Abraham and Lot. They probably should not have gone to Egypt. They went to Egypt because there was a famine in the promised land where they were. So they go to Egypt. There's no record of them praying, asking God, being led by him. They go to Egypt because there's a famine. They stay there for a while. If you remember last week, we talked about how Abraham lied about his wife, trying to keep himself out of trouble. And when they leave Egypt, Pharaoh gives them a ton of stuff, and they leave Egypt being richer than what they were before. And so they have all this stuff. They have all this stuff, and this is what we're seeing here in verse 6. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock, and there's other people that dwelt in the land too. Here's to where we get the first reason, or the first, how did Lot end up in Sodom? Because the problem of possessions. They had so much stuff. And so look at verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me and between my herdsmen and yours, for we're brethren, we're family. Is it not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take to the left, then I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Now, I feel like, again, if you take this in context, like Abraham's growing. He went down to Egypt, probably shouldn't have gone. He's coming out, and I feel like he's learning, like, I'm going to start following God, and I want to do it right. He's walking by faith, and so they have this problem. There's not enough land. They can't stay together. They got too much stuff, and it's causing a problem in their family. And so Abraham says, hey, let's separate, go different directions. If you go north, I'll go south. If you go south, I'll go north. And that's the way faith handles problems. It's very generous. It's not self-seeking. It's like, Lot, here's what, Lot, we're family. You matter to me. Let's not let money separate us. So you take your people, your herds, your flocks, and go whichever way you want, and I'll go the opposite direction. Let's maintain our friendship. And so Lot's got to pick a direction. So it started off, how did Lot end up in Sodom? Because the problem of possessions, because sometimes having too much is a problem or causes problems. And so they separate. Look at verse 9. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If I take to the left, then you go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll take to the left. But look what happens next. We have the pull of provision. So Lot starts to look around and say, which direction should I go? Where should I go? And notice what happens in verse 10. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw that all the plain of Jordan, down by Sodom and Gomorrah, that it was well watered everywhere. Like, this is a good place. I've got lots of animals. They need water. They need food. This place looks good. Let's go there. And instead of picking north or south, and staying in the land of promise, he heads east outside the land of promise to this area of the plains, to the area of Sodom and Gomorrah, outside the promised land. Why? Because it looked good. How many times, we don't have record of him praying, Lord, where should I go? But it looked good. How many times have we done something because it looked good? I want this job because I make more money. I want to go to this school. That will look the best. It looks good, but just because it looks the best doesn't mean that it's God's will for our life. It's not just how it looks. Sometimes we need to think more than just about money. I need to think about my relationship. I need to think about my relationship with God, my relationship with my family, my relationship with my church. The pull of provision, it looks good. Let's go to the third point here, the power of possibilities or the significance of choices. Look at verse 11. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan. How did Lot end up in Sodom? He chose. He chose. How does our life many times end up in a wreck? We choose. How does our life end up in shambles or end up in Sodom? By choices. Many times it's our choices that lead us to Sodom, just as Lot's choice led him to Sodom. Look at verse 14. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look. I mean, we see this real clearly in the text that Lot looks, he lifts his eyes and picks where he wants to go because it looks good. But Abram waits. And then God says, lift up your eyes. Let me show you where I want you to go, what I have for you. And he says here in verse 15, for all the land to which you see, I give to you. I feel like Abraham's growing here. He's learning to seek God first. Ask God, where do you want me to go? It's not about where I want to go. Where do you want me to go? How do we end up in Sodom? Many times we end up in Sodom because we choose. We deliberately put ourselves in harm's way. We deliberately put our family in harm's way. We choose Sodom. Maybe we think of it in this terms. Maybe we think, man, it's okay if I date this person. I know they're not a Christian, but they've got a good heart. I mean, they respect my beliefs. And we make choices that lead us down the wrong road. I think I should work for this company. I know they're gonna, put some pressure on me to compromise my values, but it's okay, I can make the most money here. Genesis 13, verses 12 and 13 makes it real clear. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, which is known to be the promised land, the place of God's presence, the place of God's provision. And yes, there's still faith to be lived by. There's still battles to be had in that land, but it's where God wanted him. And Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, which is where Sodom and Gomorrah is. And this is what it says in verse 13, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. How did he get there? Because of his choices. How do we get there? Many times because of our choices. But here's the thing, we can't totally leave Sodom. I mean, look at the world. Where are we going to go where we're not influenced somehow, some way by the culture in which we live? How do we survive in Sodom in a sense? And one of the messages of Sodom is clear. I mean, we know what Sodom was like. It was prosperous, it was oppressive, it was wealthy. They neglected the poor, abused the poor. It was sexually corrupt. It was morally hostile. It was a place of me-centered. What do I want? I'm the boss. I'm my own God. It's my truth. It's all relative. It's like what I believe is true for me, whatever you want to believe is true for you. It was all relative. It's a place where anything would go. An ancient city, although it doesn't sound much different from America in many ways. This is where we live. The question is, how do we survive in Sodom? Well, the first directive we get from the story is real clear, is we get out of Sodom. Our number one step is to get out of Sodom. Just as Lot and his family was told to flee to get out. Man, when we know we're doing wrong, we know we're involved in sin, we get out. We break ties, we go a different direction. A relationship that's taking us in the wrong direction, taking us away from God and not closer to God, we break off those ties. We have a job that's putting us into compromising situations. We break those ties. We run from sin. We get out of Sodom. This is one of the big applications of this story. But we can't get out of all the Sodom. We can't get out of every situation that has negative influence on us. So what do we do? Well, we have to get Sodom out of us. I think this is one of the things that never really happened with Lot's family. Sure, he and his daughters got out. His wife turned back, or turned around at least, and became a pillar of salt. Didn't get out. But it's like Sodom continued to live in them to the point where his two daughters had incestuous relations with their father, Lot, and it basically had a rebirth of Sodom right there. That became basically mortal enemies of Israel for years and years to come. The rebirth of Sodom, because they didn't get Sodom out. How do you get Sodom out of you? Sometimes maybe we think that it's easy to get out of Sodom. We know we need to break this relationship off. We need to not go to these certain places that attempt us to sin. But how do we get Sodom out of us? That's a little bit harder. Well, here's how it's done. There are many young people across our country, and we're seeing it, that although we may be living in a type of Sodom, they're thriving in the midst of it in God. They aren't destroyed by drugs or immorality or compromise, but they're living strong for God. And this is how they're doing it. There is a strong prayer life that they have. They are talking to God. They are listening to God. They are reading their Bibles on a regular basis. They're letting God's word shape their life, shape their values, give them direction. They've got support around them of godly people, godly friends, a godly family, a church family that they are a part of, support. And they have close connections in groups where they're sharing their life, where they're running the same direction with people who are going the same direction. Getting out of Sodom is only half the battle. The other part of the battle is getting Sodom out of us. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22. One of my favorite verses, I think, that makes it really clear on how we get out of Sodom and get Sodom out of us. There we go. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22 says, flee evil desires. That's get out of Sodom. This is Paul's way of saying the same thing. Flee evil desires. Get out. Wherever you're having evil desires, wherever the temptation is, get out of that area. Flee the evil desires of youth. But then he says you're going someplace. You're not just fleeing from one thing, you're pursuing something else. He says, pursue righteousness, pursue faith, pursue love, pursue peace. What direction are you? It's not just about running away from something, it's about running to something. It's about running away from sin, running away from temptation, and running to God, running to Jesus. Pursue these things. Are we fleeing evil? What evil do you need to flee? What temptations do you need to flee from? And then are you pursuing Jesus? What changes lives is pursuing Jesus, pursuing righteousness, pursuing faith, pursuing love, pursuing peace. And then he says, don't do it alone. Go with somebody. Go with a group. It's easier. He says, along with those who call on the name of the Lord out of a pure heart. Run with some people who are all running the same direction, have the same heart, the same goal, following Jesus with their life, staying pure. Is this the way we live? This is what the story about Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot and Abraham is about, is are we getting out of Sodom? And are we getting Sodom out of us? The question becomes, where do we live? There's 3 places we can live if you go to my next slide. We see this in this text and in the story. Abraham first went to Egypt. Egypt is a place that's known for trusting yourself. It's a place of compromise. It's a place I go because I'm not asking God where to go. I'm going where I think is just the best place. Do we live in Egypt? Do we just live our lives trusting ourselves, making our decision based upon our own wisdom, what we can come up with? We're kind of compromised living in Egypt. Abraham did that for a while. It didn't work out too well. Then there's Sodom. Sodom is a place of immorality. It's a place of sin. It's a place of prosperity. It's a place of pride and oppression and sexual immorality. It's a place of loving sin. That's what Sodom and Gomorrah are known for. And we can live in that place too. We can have a life that says, hey, we just love sin and we've got it in our life and we're doing the best job at it we can. We can live there. And it doesn't work too well either for the long term. Or we can live in Canaan. Canaan is the promised land. It's the place of promise. It's the place of God's presence. It's God's intended inheritance for his people. It's a land that flows with milk and honey. It has good things. It's also a place where we have to walk by faith. There's still some battles ahead of us, but it symbolizes living in God's presence. It symbolizes walking by faith. It's following Jesus with our life. And the question becomes, where are you living this morning? And we can go back to the testimonies of the 9 people that we baptized, and there was some element of Egypt or Sodom in their life where they were just living for themselves, trying to make their best decisions and thought they were doing what was right, and then realized they needed something better and found it in following Jesus. Will you guys stand with me this morning as we get ready to close in prayer? I just ask you to take a look at your life and just kind of evaluate, where do you want to live? Egypt, Sodom, or Canaan? And here's the thing, it's not a one-time prayer. It does start with a prayer, but it's a lifestyle of just following Jesus because he knows best. It's following him with our life. Let me say this. No matter what you're going through this morning, what your problem or issue is, if you would give me 2 things, your life would change. Give me a prayer that's heartfelt, and give me a year of your life coming to church, involved in Wednesday night, hanging around with people who are all running to Jesus, and your life will change dramatically. You come in here, you pray a prayer, and you walk out the door, your life is probably going to stay the same. You walk in here, you pray a prayer, you open up your life to Jesus, and you say, I'm going to start following him. I'm going to flee temptation. I'm going to pursue him. And I'm going to walk with those who are walking the same direction. Your life will change. Love shows up, peace shows up, joy shows up, good things happening, God working in your life, very similar to the people that got baptized this morning.